This is day 699 of Arukh HaShulchan Yomi. Like the sponsor, come to Arukh HaShulchan Yomi. Please contact me directly. Very greatly appreciate it. Today we're doing Stim and Tuf Lam and Zayin, Seif Gimel to Tuf Lam and Ches, Seif Dalid. Gimel. Chasar Tush Norach say base, and sort of by Chaver Dalid. Somebody who, excuse me, rents a house from his friend on the 14th day of Nisan. Itself, and the Imu Baduk doesn't know if it was checked. Imu Ba'ir, if the landlord said he showed him, Baduk, ask him. And if it's not, Cheskasa Baduk, you can assume that it was checked. Matla believe a diet and only have to do this notification, that suffices. That kind of show. Pakavana means to say Shesachar Yudababoka. You rented it out on the 14th in the morning. Shesachar B'Lai, if you rented out the night before, even in the middle of the night, Avagav Sabdika Maskir. No obligation to check us on the landlord, Moshe's buyer, as we've explained. The koshkin should be especially if the landlord owned it completely at the beginning of the night. Nevertheless, we wouldn't say it was soon to be checked unless he is, when he's not here. Maybe he wasn't one of the most, was not acting with alacrity. The suburb of the land, so he's going to check later at night. And well, actually, no. Yeah, he thought it was gonna check later, and but then went it out and gave the key somehow line on the tenant. So he does, if he doesn't ask, he's got to, the tenant that's house has got to check. Rashi, as Rashi said in something Daf he's going to be shachris. So you rent it out on the 14th day in the morning that you don't have to check. Zura says the same thing. So the evening you rent out at night. It came to this night was the hands of the landlord. You must certainly check. Therefore, if the landlord is not around to ask him, we put it into the house. We assume it was checked. Hengos have a tuber Muslim, so writes this evidently in one of the, I think he's in the Piskei Rosh. I don't know exactly what the Muslim is here. Ayin Sham, Rashi Azura, however, say that we don't assume that it's checked unless you take it in the morning. It says Divya Taz, there's a bracket, Divya Taz, you're going to base and move on it. Taz says, we don't understand. Mishnah Berurah says that Mishnah Berurah actually seems to be lenient. Mishnah Berurah passes that even if it won't rent it out at night. It wasn't before the beginning of night. For the beginning of night, you can actually rely that the masker checked. Well, why, when he's in the city, you have to ask him, do we not rely just on chazaka? After all, chazaka is very reliable. Since the entire year, there's a chazaka of chametz in the house. If you want to rely on the chazaka that we assume that he checked, I thought Bo more relying that to remove it from the chazaka of chametz. Chazaka against chazaka. Therefore, if you want to, wherever you can clarify it, you clarify it. It's also true of the landlord's wife and members of the house in the city. You can ask by them. Only when there's from nobody for him to ask. We assume it was checked. The Rambam, and the Torah, and the Shulchan Aruch. There's a pasuk in the Chumrah that I'm not sure the Chumrah is here. No, the Chumrah would be that if there's nobody to ask, you have. If there's nobody to ask, you would have to check. You don't say Cheskas Baduk. So words it goes. Minus Engin Das for a posting, but the posting is going to hold that if you're not allowed to ask, you can assume it's checked. Brackets says that Avik Marsham, the B'Shitas Rav Yitzchak, They seem to reject the opinion. No, because it's rabbinic halacha about lochin lakin, and we say to lie on the assumption that he checked. If he's not allowed to ask. Hey, Hamaski Chaver Cheskes Boduk. You rented out a house to your friend, and you passed it off as being checked. Don't you still be out of Shabbos? You rented out to him 14 in the morning. First of all, you told him explicitly it's checked. And then it was found out that it was not checked. It doesn't negate the terms of the. It's not a mistaken transaction, and the rental is not nullified. The afagav the chol t'nai shel kayim, even though any condition, any stipulation has to do with money is legit. Came to the Dvar Mitzvah. So in the good old days when men were men and mitzvahs were mitzvahs. It's clear to us that he would not have reneged, the lieutenant would not have reneged the deal because he would like to chop the mitzvah of B'dikas Chametz. Even if it costs a little bit of money. A person is okay doing mitzvah with his own money, but never more if it's a small amount. Therefore, he should check himself. Or hire somebody to check. And the transaction is sustained. Some say the he can deduct the cost of the if he has to pay money for it. When he stipulated before and that it must be checked. Mr. Burr says that all Achronim pass like the first opinion that you don't have to pay. He doesn't have to pay regardless. And presumably he means that you don't have to deduct. You don't deduct regardless. Otherwise, it's in the wrong place. Anyway, the Arukh HaShulchan says, if he simply explicitly, he certainly wants to do a mitzvah. But not to spend additional money, additional expenses. That which he explicitly stipulated. Below diamond, this will be your day, it's not like you're the mezuzah, answer the main mezuzah. The masker, the landlord does not have to give him back the money for the mezuzah, which now the stoker had to lay out, even though he took the house with the assumption on the chazaka there was their mezuzahs there. So the mezuzah has money shavakes because the mezuzah itself is worth money, and that money remains in that of the tenant. Mashenkin kind of most of them, but here the money for the bedika is lost, has no lasting value. There's an explicit stipulation. It doesn't matter when he rented the house, the 13th or the 14th. In brackets, he says here, Gemara says it's in Cheskes Boduk. Assumption is checked. It could be that that's in a generic case. I would say, have a mekach toes. I was saying, you know what, maybe not. Maybe when it was not explicit, just implicit, then it's not mekach toes. Maybe it's explicit. They wanted to check that it is a mekach toes. And then Maran Kosav Sham, but the Ran writes, I feel he mefurash, even specified explicitly, love and mekach toes. It's not mekach toes. Chen Kosaf Mamagi Mishnah, and Bialocha says, Tzorich in Ladina. Vav, Hakol Ne'aman B'dikas Chametz. Everybody's believed that the check the Chametz. I feel Nashim, Vav, even women, servants, or children. Came B'dikas Chametz Mirabanan, since B'dikas Chametz is Mirabanan. B'daraisa Bitul Amasaka is the Raisa, all you have to do is nullify the Chametz. In Rabbanan believe these individuals, even in the case of Chametz, since it's a case where you're Mavato, the Chametz is only an issue, the Rabbanan. Now you might say, well, women are believed about the Raisa too, because Shchita, V'nikor, that the animal was shechted, that it was trabered, that it moved the forbidden fats and veins. Umayser v'chala, Meiser was taken off, Chala was taken off. Because Chametz to have a tikkun, because Chametz, which is in major pain. Ilav Midrabanan was only not Midrabanan. The rice issue. Well, you didn't have monos, so not be credible. Shami are Nashim Atzlonios Haim. Shami says that women are lazy. It says brackets like this is the down on base. You're a maskil him new. Ulamari Shami shlo bitel. Perhaps Shami says women are lazy in the case we didn't do bitel. Shami lo chashiktanim, and the Shami does not mention children. whether you believe or not. And Arukh HaShulchan finishes off in this, Ibikirsa Shilfanei Bushalmi Mishubash. Aisham Perak Kama Halachav. He says, anyway, this Yerushalmi is distorted. I once saw the Pshat that Yerushalmi is really saying, not Nashim Atzilos with an ayin, but Nashim Atzilos saying with an aleph, and that would mean that they're too noble to check for chametz. But either one of them is difficult. But anyway, Lamaisa, they believe. So it's no practical. They believe right the rights. Everything else in the earth, for whatever reason, they're believed as well. Zayin, I feel who's a Baishen and Baruch. Even the assumption this house is not checked. Don't you do? Yadano Shabayim Lobakum. We know the owners didn't check it. Come on, nevertheless, the money Elamar Unabdua but Kanua. Nevertheless, they believe this. These people are believed to say we did check it. About Kol Mitam Shizbar, and this is the Rabbana, etc. Child has to have enough intent to check. Partially the clothes that we should be the chametz. All this is we know it by the chametz. Look at their money, otherwise it comes to the rights and they'll not believe it. Nevertheless, if you did, even when you know by the chametz, it's not a chatchila rely on women who check. It sounds bad, but the Arukh HaShulchan finishes strong. Today, Nashi Didan Bokos Yoser Betov. The women check better than the men. And they dig after even a mashu chametz. And they wash and they clean all the places. And they are more meticulous than the men. Mr. says, no, nevertheless, Chatchila shouldn't tell the women to check. Okay, Machlekes Mishnah Arukh HaShulchan. It's a joke they say. Bashir Leib Diskin, not Bashir Leib. Yeah, the Maria Brisk. He was out. He was in his house, Erev Pesach, and somebody came up to him and said, "Have you finished getting rid of the chametz?" So I think it's Chad v'Cholok, Menachem Mem Porosh, I don't know which Porosh it is. Anyway, so he says, say to him, "Do you get rid of all your chametz?" So he says, "Yeah, except for that big piece over there." And he points at his wife. His wife says to Mario, "Don't worry about that one. I was sold to a goy a long time ago." Okay, be as it may. Tough lamed ches. You have a mouse. This used to be a major problem in the good old days. A mouse which went into a place which was ready checked and had a loaf of bread in its mouth. We're not afraid that either that mole or that weasel drag chametz. The makom shein machlis chametz to place the chametz not normally taken. Shim nachos we buy slabais. We're concerned from house to house. It takes it from place to place. Nachos me'ir should be concerned from city to city. And the davar sof there is no end. But we'll dive and check in the 14th, 14th Akashon. The Nachash is cold if you think that the cold is going to drag it. And can't hechem mashkach so makom shenach needs to be chametz. I can possibly have a concept of a place we don't bring in chametz. It's a bdika which should not require bdika. Nechosha chulda girusha maybe in the middle of the year the chulda drags some chametz there. Zayin raya kokach. But that's not such strong evidence. The yichol yesh mashkach so makom shein chulda yichol. Maybe have a hermetically sealed room where the chulda can't get in. But it can't the account of this Sorah that you can go ad infinitum. So therefore, even where there are chudos, you don't have to be concerned that they remove the chametz to a place which you already checked, to a place which you wouldn't check, etc. We didn't see the chulda grabbing a piece of chametz. I mean, the shakla we see that it did. He needs a nucha. He needs to do b'dika over and have a scratch. Why don't we assume that the chulda ate the chametz? And they the possibility that perhaps the chulda ate the chametz is not motzi mivad chametz. It does not take away from the chazaka that was definitely chametz there. Even though this is not, it's a prevalent suffix, and we could say that if took the food to eat it, right? The stomach took the food. Then that it's still an assumption, not strong enough to remove from the definite existence of chametz, which established which we saw when the Hulda took it. It's not clear. Perhaps only if you didn't nullify. So it's a spec of the rice. You have to be machmer. I was thinking the rabbanim, but the rabbanim should be them. Anyway, we know about the comments. No negative go there. Perhaps not so concerned. Although we say I feel spec of the rabbanim. I mean, ain't something they both not to they vadai. Perhaps even my subject rabbanim, we say no. The subject is not able to resolve the vadai problem. The bracket says here, "Chokiyako osif kanav because of the gam of the rabbanim here came." It says in fact by the rabbanim also. Ain't so much they vadai. I'm not so sure, says Oshul. The Gemara Sham, a Mishnah Ein Choshim Kai. The Gemara there is going on the Mishnah that it says Ein Choshim, that we're not concerned that Chulda took it. So a Mishnah Lo Muradani that Bodik Shivata. And that Mishnah was not was stated before we came to the principle that somebody who checks has to be Mavatal as well. So therefore it's possible there it's the Raisa. Back to Chavish Meis V'ach enough on the Maisi, I was there having the Raisa. In fact, the case is brought there by a chaver who died, and especially took maisus, etc. Those are the rises. And Bishop says, well, even if about the chametz, we're not lenient because fake rabbanon, we don't rely on that. And then Arukh HaShulchan is about to say that too. If we say a mouse, we see a mouse run into a house, holding on in its mouth to a loaf. And he went after him. And he found crumbs. I feel they call kikar, even though crumbs encompass the entire loaf. Which the mouse brought in. No, we don't rely on that because normally mice don't make crumbs. We say that these crumbs came from elsewhere, not from that loaf. And certainly if the sum of the parts does not add up to the whole of the loaf. So you have to check that room, which the mouse went for, so not more. Them have a suffix, other rooms are suffix, he's by the same number. So suffix, al suffix, low, the suffix al suffix lo al. It's a question whether the holder went in, the achbar went into the other rooms or didn't. Ben kikar gadol le kikar gadol. The difference regards but the size of the loaf. Chen kelev, a tanigo, also a dog or a fowl. Ganken FOWL. Ganken ain't out of fire. They don't normally make crumbs. Chen imatlu mitzvah filu shleimus. If they took the loaf and you saw it even intact, you may improve him if there are crumbs there. Ain't zemi kikar. It's not from this loaf. Acher, it's from a different one. But it's got to be checked. I feel bittul chametz even you did bittul. Well, it's not exactly what it says every time you did bittul. It's not going to work, but you still have to check. That's close enough from Mishnah Berurah. Okay, so in any event, the Mishnah Berurah says if you found crumbs, first of all, it says you don't have to check the other rooms if you're in Vato the chametz or it was a small loaf, so therefore you can assume that it was consumed here where the crumbs are. Mishnah Berurah says if you find the crumbs, that is the problem. But if you find a whole loaf, it doesn't require b'dika. Specifically, when you nullified it, we don't go l'kula. You have to check the entire house. Unless you know that this is the loaf which your mouse took. What if a child goes into a checked house? We don't have enough so we can rely on his statement that he ate the bread. And we find crumbs after him, and so no, still we don't have to go back and check. We assume the assumption is that he ate it. When these crumbs come from him, because children do make crumbs. So those crumbs fell from him at the time he was eating. If the crumbs are the size of the entire loaf or not. If there is enough So we say it didn't eat anything, and this is just he crumbled it up. Vim Aimbo doesn't enough in the crumbs. I mean, we say mitzaso acham mitzaso pirera. Somebody ate and somebody ground up. Vim rocking the loading mitzah pirera and kal. If you don't find any crumbs whatsoever, ain't tom shachlo. You assume he ate it because there's no raglayim l'davar. There's no evidence that he did. The Torah about can you have to check. Yeshua some say the dafka shish pirurin kidei kol kikar. You can rely on the pirurim being all of it if they are the same size as the entire loaf. And aimbo, but if there's not the crumbs do not add up to the size of the entire loaf, ain we don't say that the mouse ate the rest. The suffix achila ain't a matzudei vade chametz because the questionable eating by the tinuk does not resolve the problem of the vade chametz which he brought in. Mishabur says that the primary halacha is like the first svara. That means if you find any crumbs, you can assume that it was eaten, unless he was not mebakal chametz. That's after the time that he can batel, then he should be machmir and check everything. The Arukh continues. Veneerly, the kol choza ain't chilu ben bitul lo bitul. You want to say there's no difference between when you were notified and didn't notify. The ksheton, when you assume that mouse ate it, till feel below bitul. You assume the mouse ate it without being batel. Mishnah navi kavare. It's like it's definitely happened. And we don't assume it was eaten. Ain't tolan feel bitul. We don't assume it was eaten if he does notify the chametz. You know, ain't suffix motzim nevada. I feel about if we say that a suffix achila cannot remove some of its category of vade chametz, even though it's a derabbanan.